Welcome everyone officially to Best Practices in ELA for Differentiation. We are going to get started. We're so excited to have you with us today. Just a few logistics before we get going. We want to thank the New Hampshire Department of Education for sponsoring this webinar today. Because we're in webinar format, everyone is muted. However, we do really encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A section of the Zoom. You will receive an email tomorrow that is going to have a link to this slide deck that you are seeing. Also, it will contain a professional development certificate and a link to the recording of this webinar. And then there will be a brief survey at the end of this webinar. We really do appreciate your feedback and we do read it. So we would love it if you remember to fill that out at the end. So this is me. My name is Tammy Hilton. I am a professional development specialist with demonstrated success. I worked in the public school system right up till about a couple years ago. And I was a high school and middle school English teacher. I've been an instructional specialist and building leader. And I do a lot of work around curriculum development, literacy, effective teaching strategies, and multi-tiered systems of support. And we also have Kate, who is on with us today. She is your educational consultant for language arts at the Department of Education. So I am going to let Kate introduce herself and I'm going to turn it over to her for now.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I really appreciate coming on your vacation or after your vacation. I am new to the Department of Education. I have worked 16 years in an elementary setting and 7 years in a clinical setting with K-12 students. And I'm recently attending Northeastern University to look at orthographic mapping and technology. So I'm excited to be here. And again, I just appreciate all that you're doing for our children in New Hampshire. All right, so we're going to go with an overview today. We're going to talk about what differentiation is, ways to differentiate, transferring to the classroom, and a wrap-up question. And I wish I could talk to you guys throughout this, but it is webinar, so we'll do our best. So what is differentiation? And if you click the next button, differentiation is adjusting your instruction to meet the unique needs of the diverse learners in front of you. And in order to do this, it requires intentional planning to support individualized and personalized learning. And the reason there are shoes on the bottom is because one size does not fit all. And it's our job as educators to meet the needs of the students in front of us. And differentiation helps us do that. So I really enjoy this graphic to really understand what differentiation is and what differentiation is not. And when we look down this, a lot of people kind of confuse differentiation. It's actually a philosophy grounded in understanding the student's needs. And one of the biggest things is it's not just assigning group work. It's really intentional. And for elementary school, it's having flexible group work. So if I know my student has comprehension issues, I may put them in 2 different groups depending on what the tasks I'm doing. It's really thinking again about what is the evidence showing us on these students, and then how can I support them? Can I pull them into a lesson with this group and then out? If they're using phonics, I might go into 2 different groups. So it's intentional and flexible. The other thing differentiation is it's again a philosophy, and it's not just a fad, but it's not just about choice. Some people think differentiation is just choice, student voice, and choice. It's actually activities that are held together with clear learning targets and goals for the whole classroom. And it's really talking about how the same isn't necessarily for all students. We need to have the goals or the content, but we also need to be able to understand that students have different paths to get to that learning content. and that we need to provide scaffolding to help them reach that end goal. So differentiation, there's a lot of research that went into this slide. Differentiation really is important because the students all have unique learned experiences before they enter our class. Each student brings their own content, their own background. They're all bringing what their lived experience is into your classroom settings. And for teachers, we really need to get to know the students, the family, and the community. And all three of those things are really important when we're thinking about our classroom. We need to know the students' social and emotional needs, their academic needs, and their strengths. And there are various assessments to help us identify gaps and understand that. Differentiation is not watering down the content, but rather providing tools to ensure all students succeed. And clear learning objectives must be used for all students. So having a clear target where everybody can get to that bullseye. And really, as you think about this, I want you to think about, how does knowing the learner's profile really help to differentiate? Slide. Okay. So we can differentiate in many different ways. One way is we can differentiate by making connections to the previous lessons, by building our students' background knowledge so that we all understand the content being taught, by providing wait time instead of just the person with the answer, and by explaining concepts in more than one way. Not one way is for everybody, again, that one size fits all. And then providing tools to support learning. These tools can be graphic organizers, technologies, or various tools that students can use. So this is something that comes up a lot in education. And there is a great video, but I'm going to go through the slide first. In education, there is equality and equity. And these are really two different terms that often get confused or interchanged. So many people think that equity in education is giving everybody the same. So if we give everybody the same content or the same reading book, everybody's fair. But actually, we really need to give students what they need to be able to succeed and access those. So, Tammy, we need to mute. So how can we work through narrowing the gaps to improve student learning? And then how do you differentiate in reading and writing to meet your learners' needs? All right, let's show the video. There's no knowledge. Tammy, you need to unmute.
Of planning and grading. That insanity is not what differentiation is all about. Differentiating instruction is really a way of thinking, not a pre-planned list of strategies. Oftentimes, it is making decisions in the moment based on this mindset. It's recognizing that, to paraphrase Rick Wormley, fair doesn't always mean treating everyone equally. It's recognizing that all of our students bring different gifts and challenges, and that as educators, we need to recognize those differences and use our professional judgment to flexibly respond to them in our teaching. Carol Tomlinson talks about the ability to differentiate in three areas: content, process, and product. For content, student choice is one way we might differentiate, like allowing students to choose their research topics or essay prompts. As teachers, we need to keep our eyes on the prize. In other words, we have to keep asking ourselves, what are the main learning objectives? One day, my students were writing an argument essay about what would be the worst natural disaster to experience. John's head was down on the desk. He was not doing anything. I knew that he was interested in football, so I told him that he could write an essay on why his favorite team was the best. He would still have to make an argument just about football instead of hurricanes or earthquakes. His eyes lit up. He got to work and wrote what his mother later told me was the first essay he had ever written in school. He had followed all the guidelines of a good argument essay. The prize in this case was learning to write an argument essay, not learning to write about natural disasters. To differentiate by process, teachers can change up how they group students. Sometimes a mixed ability group might work best, while sometimes it might be appropriate to have same ability groups. We might have an English proficient buddy work with an English language learner to help them out. During independent reading time in my early morning class several years ago, one student tended to fall asleep. I told him that if he wanted, he could go to the back and sit on a desk and read. Soon, several others joined him. A few days later, I saw another student dozing off. Before I could say anything, one of his classmates whispered to him, "Just go sit on the desk." Again, it's a matter of keeping our eyes on the prize. What are the learning objectives and what are the best roads to get there for different students? Teachers can also differentiate by the type of product students create. The major demonstration of learning doesn't always have to be an essay or a multiple choice test. One year, I had a student who liked to doodle when other students or I were talking. I told her it was okay as long as she was doodling about the information we were discussing. She built on those doodles to create a final project that brilliantly and visually represented all the key points we had covered. When I give tests, I often give students an extra blank page where they can write anything else they remember about the topic being tested that they think is important. I often find the quality of thinking and writing better there than in response to my test questions. None of the differentiating strategies I've mentioned have created any extra work for me. They did require that I had relationships with my students to know their strengths, challenges, and interests. And I needed to demonstrate flexibility in my thinking. Making these strategies successful also required building a strong class culture so that some of the students were being treated differently and they understood why. And they understood that that was the only way to be truly fair. The ideas mentioned here are just a drop in the bucket. There are a zillion other ways we can support our students' gifts and challenges. We just need to keep our minds and ears open.
All right, stand by everyone. Let me just go back to our presentation. All right.
And while we're there, we did have a question about the evidence-based assessments, and that is my next webinar. There has been a lot of current research coming out with Professor Matt Burns in understanding how to use evidence and to make decision making and which evidence which review of which evidences are working based on longitudinal data. So that will be coming out in the next webinar series, but I did want to answer that.
I'm Larry Falazza.
So sorry.
Okay, so we're on the next slide. So next
Yeah.
slide. Thanks, Tammy.
Yes, you're welcome. All right.
Okay, so what happens sometimes is that we give everybody the same approach, the same book, the same tasks to do in education, but in reality, that might not be exactly what the students need. So we really need to be thinking about the students in front of us and seeing what supports they need. For instance, the child who is not tall enough can't see over the fence. So if we take the box and we move it over here, we give this child extra support, now they're able to be successful in the class. You can see multiple different approaches on this and multiple different graphics. Next slide. So one of the big things is don't just differentiate to differentiate. In order to differentiate, you really need to be intentional in your planning, and you need to know the purpose of your differentiation. For instance, let's say you notice a bunch of students are not able to do introduction sentences or a paragraph. So you begin to create mini lessons around that because you have evidence that that's an area that the students are struggling with. So you really have to know what the purpose is. One technique is called backwards design, and this is when you identify your end result, then you determine acceptable evidence, and then you plan learning experiences and instruction. So you're going from the backwards to the front. I know my students need to know this task, So how am I going to get them there? What am I going to do to help support them get there? And then you need to adjust based on the students. And it all comes down to the data. What is the data showing you, and how are you going to help those students with those outcomes? Okay, so now we're going to move into ways to differentiate. So differentiation is really important, and differentiation is a teacher's response to learning needs. Again, responding to the learners in front of you. So in order to do this, again, I'm really stressing that you need to know the students. You need to know their abilities, their interests, their learning style, their family, and their accommodations and IEPs. You also need to build a community throughout the year to support one another. And you really do need to be using evidence in order to understand how to differentiate. So evidence-based screeners, summative assessments, formal assessments, student work, and observation. What are you observing, or what evidence is showing you that the students need this task? And then how are you going to support that? Again, it all comes down to data. Data drives decision making, and it can be observation or what you're noticing in your class, but that's what's going to drive how you're going to differentiate. Okay, so the ways to differentiate. Teachers can differentiate content, process, so what you're going to do there, product, and learning environment, according to three main things: readiness, interest, and learning profile. So when we're talking about that, we're going to go into each one of these things on the next slide, but we're really looking at the ways in which we can differentiate that content. So how can I get the content to change? Maybe I'm teaching a unit, so I want to expose all of the students to the vocabulary of the unit and then break it down for readability, or break down the tasks. Again, that's expanding the content. The process, am I going to allow them to choose how they want to present a final product? Environment, am I going to have flexible or fixed, grouping? And then really their student output. So a lot of the times in education, you're going to hear this modeling of I do. So I'm going to demonstrate and explicitly teach. We do it together. You do. And then you don't often hear this one. Can you expand it? So once you've mastered these techniques, can you go beyond my instruction? So I do, we do, you do. Can you expand it? This modeling helps students target their needs. We can add and remove scaffolding as needed. If a student needs more support, we can add it, and eventually we want to kind of take it away. But if they need to go back to scaffolding, we need to go back and add it. Building background knowledge is essential in any unit that we are starting. We need to understand and build background knowledge for our students to be successful. And we need to provide multiple texts. Now, I know this is going to get we can't just have that one text. We need to have readability. We need to be able to provide text. So for instance, if you have a theme in your classroom, are there other books that are still going to get to that same main concept or idea? And is it important that everybody's on reading from the same universal text, or should we be able to meet the needs of the students in front of us, but yet still have that content knowledge that's being required? For instance, if it's a survival theme, you've got all different kinds of books you can pull at different readability, but still getting to the how do we survive in the wild, or any theme in your classroom. And then you can do the same with your materials, the type of materials you're exposing to the kids. Direct instruction that is explicit. That means that you know where the students' areas of concern are, and you're going to target those. You're going to target the needs of the students in front of you. Okay, so there's some ways that we can do this. We can provide first, we need to understand learning profile. So in order to understand the learning profile, it's a little bit more than just the learner itself. So understanding that the learner profile is a complete picture. And by that, I mean, it's the student's preferences, it's their strengths, right? It's their challenges, It's their interest, talent, and aspirations. That's really understanding the whole picture of that learner profile, as well as their social, emotional, and everything that goes into that. And we need to provide authentic learning opportunities for these students. We need to have maybe flexible seats, flexible options for them to access their learning. And we need to enable the students to choose the tools or approaches that best help them to make sense of the content. So there are a variety of tools, and we need to encourage and foster the children to understand, I need this because it helps me understand this. And providing them with a variety of tools. This could be graphic organizers, these could be technology, but something that they know that it can help them break apart an assignment and then put it back together, right? Parts to whole and whole to parts. Okay, encouraging differentiation based on interest. So this is important. It's important to give students the ability to have voice and choice. It allows for encouragement and support. And so by offering students opinions in their assignments or lessons, you're really going to increase your student engagement. And some ways you can do this is by allowing them to have a research topic. They can pick their own research topic, like in the movie where it was an opinion piece. They can pick out their opinion piece, but you're still structuring that way. They could pick out a research topic of their interest, and they still have to structure it a certain way with the 5-point paragraph. So allowing them to have some options in school is important. I do believe in providing multiple different texts and different types of learning materials, and provide a variety of avenues to best support student exploration. And really, then again, having access to the materials and the supports, allowing them to choose, okay, this graphic organizer helps me organize my writing versus this one, and having those different approaches available to them in the classroom. So, as I'm talking about this slide, I really want you to think about the role choice plays in differentiation in your classroom. Okay, Tammy, I think that's you.
Yes, thank you so much, Kate. So how are we going to hook our kids through interest? We need to know our students. This goes back to the learning profile that Kate was talking about a few minutes ago. You know, what are they actually interested in? We need to make sure that we are giving them achievable challenges, right? And achievable would be the key word there. We also want to make sure that they have a connection to what they're learning, or from what they're learning to their actual lives. Thinking about how can they apply their knowledge in terms of text to text, text to self, and text to world. We know that the more kids can apply what they're learning to their own lives, the more engaged they are, the more relevant it becomes to them, the more meaningful, and the more that it sort of sticks in a way for them, where they can then take it and apply it and synthesize it across multiple perspectives, contents, etc. And we also want to make sure that we're offering new and meaningful perspectives using a variety of those approaches. What that's really going to do is it's going to foster relationships and connections between the students in your class, between you and the students, and it's going to offer them novelty, which again will heighten their interest and keep them engaged. And so, as Kate mentioned, we can differentiate by these 4 main topics here: the content, process, product, and learning environment. And so we've included this graphic here to give you some ideas about what that may look like. So using your knowledge of the students you have in your classroom, thinking about content, content is what is actually going to be learned. So these are your standards, these are your learning outcomes, and these are thinking about, how can I modify any of this to help reach the students? When we think about process, that is really thinking about how do the students, acquire the information? Is it through scaffolds? What levels of complexity am I offering? What do my flexible groups look like? Kate just spoke to that a couple of minutes ago with the small groups and the flexible grouping, that intentionality that needs to go into it. What learning tools am I offering the students? Make sure you question students effectively, but don't lead them to answers when we think about the process. In regards to the product, there are different ways of assessing and approaching the work. So are we using multiple modalities? Really think about with the product, how are we, or you as the educator, going to see their learning? In what ways is the learning going to become visible, both for you as the teacher and for kids with each other? And then finally, that environment, is there, what do our room arrangements look like? What do our seating arrangements look like? Do we have ways for students to interact with each other? What types of learning are we offering? Is it all individual? Are we offering collaborative learning? Is it through pairs, small groups? How are we allowing and encouraging student ownership within the classroom, etc.? So here, this all comes from the Iris Center out of Vanderbilt University, which is a great resource. And when you get the link to this slide deck tomorrow in a follow-up email, you will be able to click on the blue hyperlink text you see here at the top of the screen. And anything you see listed in purple is also a hyperlink. And so they have gone through and they've really sort of mapped out ways within content that you could differentiate for those things. Kate was talking to us earlier about the students, about their readiness, about their interests, about their learning profile. So when teachers differentiate content, the same concept or skill is being taught to the students. However, the curriculum that you use to teach it is going to look different for different students. So again, this table highlights a number of strategies that you can use to differentiate that content and indicates the characteristic it will fit. So you have things like curriculum compacting, which we'll talk about a little bit later, scaffolding, learning contracts, etc. When teachers differentiate process, again, we have our standards, we have our grade level things that we need to teach, but this is going to be the manner in which a student is going to make sense of all that information, either in regards to the topic or skill. So as a teacher, you want to think about varying the activities that students use to master those concepts or skills. So they can, you can decide how to best do this by taking into account their interest, their levels, their profiles, and break students down into groups or pairs or into different activities for them to do. And so again, here it's thinking about ways to jigsaw, types of graphic organizers we're using, manipulatives, all of those things. And then when teachers differentiate by product, they are thinking about the variety of ways, again, that kids are going to showcase their learning. How are they going to make their learning visible? So is it going to be through a video or a written report or a performance task? And so you want to think about making sure that you're including all the different modalities, right? Like the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, involving hands-on kind of stuff. This also thinking about, are kids going to do this alone, with a partner, or in pairs? So again, this table is just highlighting a few strategies that you could use in order for kids to be able to do that. And then when we think about the learning environment, I've hyperlinked you here to 5 keys to good room arrangements. And so there's a graphic here that sort of goes along with that as well. But you should start thinking about, if you haven't already, more flexible options that can work within your classroom to accommodate groups and or individuals. So creating a structure around that, helping kids feel secure while working in groups, pairs, or independently without the direct supervision of you. And then creating, the floor space, the wall space, the storage space, your bulletin boards, all of your learning environment supports that student-centered sort of autonomous environment. So I am going to turn it back over to Kate, who's going to talk to you a little bit about ways to transfer all of this information into the classroom.
Okay. So again, we just really want to stress that every student needs to be exposed to the full intent of the grade level standards, but that we need to use research, evidence-based strategies and thinking about how we use assessment. It can be observational, data, all different things to make data-driven decisions. And by understanding where those students are, should equal the instruction for the students. And really have high expectations. We're not saying to water down or change your expectations. You still maintain your target expectations. You're just adding supports like graphic organizers or other ways to help the students break down those assignments and meet their needs. So appreciative inquiry is something that has come up a lot in education. Are we having an appreciative mindset, or are we having a deficit mindset? So here's a cartoon where they've dug and look at all we've done, but look at what we're missing. And sometimes in education, we focus on this deficit mindset. So when we think about that, we really love our children and we want to do what's best for that. And sometimes we really think about, okay, this is what they need, this is what they need. But we miss those gems of opportunity to understand what the student's really excelling at. And then how do we tap into some of that asset to help those deficits? What can we do to really pull those students towards the target goal that we're learning or engage them? So really thinking about changing our assumptions to thinking about what are the students doing really well, and then what are some supports we can do to help them move. So I love inquiry and project-based learning. Those are some of my favorite things to do in the educational setting. So in inquiry-based learning, it's really active learning that encourages the students to formulate a question, or a question has gone out and they have to like kind of conduct their own inquiry into it. They're conducting their own research and they're really exploring new ideas. Sometimes people will ask a guiding question or an essential question in an inquiry-based thing, and then the students then have to kind of dive into this research and then really have their own way of presenting their findings. So they ask questions and then they formulate a discussion. They collect research. They go and they begin to research in libraries or research on different books, and that begins to understand their access to knowledge. Then they have to evaluate the question. Do these researchers really address the question at hand? Or are there new questions that I need to go off and really begin to understand in order to really get back to that question? So it's really constructing, reformalizing, re-examining, and synthesizing. And inquiry-based learning is really engaging when it's done in classrooms, and it really allows the kids to have some autonomy, but also still teaches them the fundamentals of forming an essay, writing, finding evidence to support your theory, really going into Bloom's taxonomy and really thinking on those cognitive, measures in Hess. So really thinking there. Project-based learning is another wonderful technique, and I had been trained with Rose Colby. It's really, again, coming from the students. So I think sometimes project-based learning gets confused and people want to have accumulating project. But project-based learning kind of taps into inquiry and almost is a mini action research, where the students are really investigating a problem and having a hands-on solution. These could be problems that they've noticed in the school. Some projects have been creating greenhouses or building things. It's really, again, making education come to life. And the students can do presentations to stakeholders on their project in order to get their project to really come to life.
All right, thank you, Kate. So in differentiation, we're thinking again about the students in front of us and how to access grade level content and standards. right? And so it really all starts with tier one. Tier one is the core foundation of all of this. And the goal of tier one, through all of these things that we see here. So it's all about meeting the student needs, right? And we do that through differentiation. We do that through monitoring student progress and assessments and data analysis. And even thinking about, what we have in place for our multi-tiered systems of support. Because the goal as they go up through the grade levels is that we want all of the kids to leave our school system ready to face whatever it is they're going to choose to do afterwards, whether that is go off to college, join the military, join the career and workforce, whatever it might be. So we want to just be thinking about that all the time, especially at tier one. And so when we think about tier one, we think about that means we have high quality curriculum. We also think about the layers of supports that we are building in for students. And then we think about not just those summative assessments, but those formative assessments, qualitative and quantitative, that is going to really help capture and show a picture of the whole child in regards to their abilities and their deficits, so that we can grow from there. And so we want to make sure that we are working with both the concrete and the abstract information when we do this for kids. We want to think about doing this not just for the kids who are struggling or have a disability, but also for those who need enrichment or support, right? So thinking about what are we going to do with the kids that are already meeting or exceeding the grade level standards? We want to make sure we're differentiating for them just as much as we do for those kids who are struggling and in need of support in some way. So this could be done through explicit instruction, like Kate referenced earlier at the beginning of the webinar. Modeling is very important no matter what grade level you teach. And then thinking out loud, this is also important regardless of the grade level. Really modeling and being intentional with showing kids how to process things, how to think aloud, and what this really looks like to question text or authors or character motivations or whatever it is that it might be. Because when you do this, you are showing kids what learning looks like and how you want them to do it. Right. And then there's all the other considerations that we have talked about before, ways to remove or identify potential barriers, the way you structure that environment, providing clarity, and then really giving kids multiple opportunities to practice over and over again throughout the course of a unit. And so again, differentiation is not just about meeting the needs of struggling learners, but it's also about supporting those who are already meeting or exceeding grade levels. So it's that whole child approach. So the end of the quote you see here really strikes me the most, that gifted students, brilliant students, are the one who needs the closest attention. So I talk about this a lot when I present to schools about MTSS. We really have to keep in mind these students who need this, because if we don't engage our gifted learners, they are the ones who will disengage very quickly. And sometimes the biggest behavior problems in a school are your gifted learners, because they are so disengaged. They start becoming behavior problems. They start having attendance issues. And as they get older, they might be your possible dropouts, believe it or not. And so that's why we really want to think about ways to reach our gifted, brilliant students along with those that struggle through differentiation. And so we can see here some effective approaches to doing this are acceleration, right? But be aware that acceleration alone may not succeed in and of itself in engaging students. We also want to think about the depth, extending that current curriculum, whether that's our activities, our tasks, whatever it is, to help them go beyond and continue to have that appropriate challenge for themselves. Complexity. making sure we're increasing the sophistication of the topic or pursuing greater rigor of the content outside of the regular curriculum that we have. And then creativity. This, I think can speak to gifted students, obviously, but also, kids need more creativity, especially as they go up through the upper grades, presenting open-ended problems, doing investigations, collaborating with others. And then strategies that research has been proven to not work in and of themselves is just assigning kids more of the same work, right? So it is not helpful for, it is not enrichment if you just say to a kid, oh, you finished these 10 problems, here's 10 more. Giving free time to early finishers. This can be a great reward. And there's definitely a time and place for this. I'm not saying get rid of this altogether, but it's not effective if we're just constantly telling our, gifted students, oh, okay, just go do whatever you want because you've already, met the standard or you finished your work. So just go entertain yourself with whatever. Assigning kids like your high learners to your struggling learners, right? Again, there's a time and place for this. Sometimes if kids love doing it or they ask to do it, or every once in a while, that's fun. But if we are just assuming or constantly doing this without really giving the kids choice in it or intentionality behind it, they check out very quickly and they often become very frustrated. So we want to just be cognizant of how often we're doing this. Providing pull-out activities, we want to try to keep kids in the classroom as much as possible so that they can have the interaction, the engagement with their peers. And so we want to be aware of how much pull-out time we are giving kids, either for those that are struggling or for our gifted learners. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're not just offering them enrichment through the computer. Again, there is a time and a place for those programs. There's some lovely computer enrichment things out there, but if that's all we're offering all the time, it's going to disengage the kids very quickly. So we want to think about these things. Kate talked about flexible, intentional small grouping earlier on in the presentation. But we want to think about creating those small groups with these things that you see here. So data, again, Kate mentioned data drives all of this. I say this in my, MTSS presentation, data drives all in the world of education, right? And so making sure that we are meeting kids where they're at, that we are being intentional with our data, and that we are constantly collecting it, evaluating it, implementing things based on it, etc. The scope and sequence, this allows us a systematic way to adjust our instruction based on that data and to be really responsive to what the kids need. And then, giving them the explicit instructions so that they can then apply their learning. The more opportunities you can give kids to really apply their learning, practice these new skills across multiple venues and through different perspectives and those authentic learning experiences that Kate mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, that is going to help your students tremendously. And then students don't naturally chunk information into smaller pieces. And so we need to explicitly teach them how to do it so that they can understand. And then providing the scaffolds to help them and support them through a variety of different ways in order to do that. And so, choice is really the key as we transfer into the classroom. Again, I know kids cannot choose every single thing. We have curriculums, we have standards, we have certain things that we need to do, but anytime we can offer them just a little bit is going to be super helpful. And so we want to begin with the end in mind. Kate mentioned this earlier when she talked about backwards design. We want to make sure that we are devising essential questions for the unit that are really going to help identify enduring understandings that kids need to reach, that we are segmenting our learning targets into different instructional methods and domains and ways of doing it, that we are planning high quality assessments to measure learning along a continuum of skills that are going to be needed throughout the unit, that we are anticipating the needs of the mixed ability learners, and that we have the rich content specific activities around it. And then we're planning for meaningful ways for them to demonstrate that learning. So when we talk about differentiation, we hear a lot about tiered lessons as well. So the what and how teachers differentiate depends on the needs of the students in your class, right? And so this diagram illustrates the connections between classroom elements and the student characteristics we talked about earlier. It speaks to the ways that teachers can adjust the different elements, the process, the product, the content, things like that. And tiered instruction is when teachers are making slight adjustments to the same lesson to meet the needs of learners. So again, you have the same standards, the fundamental skills that you need all kids to do, but then you are building in challenges and tasks to make things interesting, engaging, and challenging through different materials, through different time allotments, through your pacing, through ways that kids can express things in their learning, etc. So there's basically 6 ways you can do this. You could tier lessons by challenge level using Bloom's taxonomy. You could tier lessons by complexity, which means that you are addressing the needs of students at introductory levels, as well as those who are ready for more advanced work. You could tier lessons by resources, so choosing materials at various reading levels or complexity of content, and then tiering assignments around those resources. Tiering by outcomes, where you have students using the same materials, but the products vary at the end. You could tier by process, where the products are the same, but the way students arrive at those outcomes may vary. And then finally, the product, grouping by multiple intelligences or learning styles, followed by assignments that fit those preferences. So those are just some of the different ways that you could tier some lessons. Curriculum compacting, we mentioned this earlier. This is really a technique for differentiating instruction that, again, is just allowing you to make slight adjustments to certain curriculum with enrichment opportunities, as well as scaffolds for those that might need it. And so we've hyperlinked you to a couple of different tools here that will just help you explore those a little bit more in depth, and really looking at ways that you could do this for your learners. So these are also some different ways that you could do things within your classroom. These are specific little activities or things that you may or may not be familiar with. So anchored activities are when you're providing meaningful work for students when they finish an assignment, or when they might get stuck, on something. You might use some tiered activities, which we just talked about, where you might do different groupings. Stations refer to spots where kids can work on different tasks simultaneously in the classrooms and then rotate through them to learn skills or concepts related to a topic. Kids might even skip stations if they know certain material, or if they have tasks that are designed for, abilities that are not geared towards them. Centers. So Caroline Tomlinson actually differentiates centers from stations. She says that centers are areas in the classroom where students can refine a skill or extend a concept, whereas stations are different places where students are working on those tasks simultaneously. So that's how Caroline Tomlinson differentiates between centers and stations. And then, you can see here too, think, pair, shares are a great quick way. Flipped learning, partner talk, all of these are hyperlinks that you could go and explore further into looking at these. And then the Freyer model, I will say, is great for vocabulary. It expands across all grade levels or contents. I've even seen Freyer models used in math classes. So it's a great tool. And then here's just, again, thinking about end products. And when thinking about a product, we have to keep in mind that Carol Ann Tomlinson says, her motto is, in this class, we are never finished. Learning is a process that never ends, right? And so these are just different ways that kids could show their learning. And so we will kind of bring this webinar to an end with a quote from her. She says that teachers that ignore student differences are unlikely to maximize potential in any student who differs significantly from the norm. So again, we want to remember that differentiation is about meeting the needs of the whole child on a variety of levels. And as teachers, we really need to embrace the differences in the classroom. Carol Ann Tomlinson just summarizes that beautifully. We have taught to the middle for a really long time in education, and we need to get away from that mindset and making sure that we are teaching to kids who are above and below, as well as that status quo. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate, who's going to
you guys have been really quiet for me. I like to be engaging, so it's so hard. So there's not many questions coming in. But this is an opportunity to ask questions, and I have some questions to you. I just want you to kind of think about your classroom setting. So how do you differentiate in your setting for the reading? And then how do you differentiate for writing needs? And then what role does that choice play in differentiation in your classroom? And what differentiation tools or strategies do you find most effective, and why? And I wish we could share resources, ideas, and strategies, because we have a group of 100 educators on this call, and you know your curriculum. And so if there's a way to share or collaborate as a state, I highly encourage that across this content area. So this is times for you to ask questions. We are here and available to ask questions. You can put them in the chat if you'd like. I know that a question came in about assessments, and that is the next webinar that I will be running, data-informed decision making, and the types of assessments that are currently out there. Oh, got a question coming in. Okay, so there's a lot of data tools other than SAS to ensure valid and reliable data. Let me pull up a link to answer that question. There has been extensive research on evidence-based assessments and tools. And so I will pull that up. And then I can answer Alexandra's question in a minute about UDL, which is hard. Tammy and I went back and forth on the UDL because differentiation instruction and UDL are really similar, but there are some slight differences. So let me pull up the tool for assessment. Any other questions want to come in? Tammy, do you want to talk about differentiation and UDL, or do you want to make me take that?
Yeah, so I'll let you, as you're pulling that up, I will let you.
I'm pulling up the other question. I just want to make sure we're all
okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So
there's a tool right here. I'm going to put it for everybody. This is a tool that's come out to if I type the answer, will everybody get it? I'm going to paste in a tool, and it's about data-based decisions. And then it is from the National Intensive Intervention, and it provides also a guide for all the tools that are currently on the market. Like there's Dibbles, there's Acceleron, there's different tools, and it rates them. So I'll send a couple links out on that. We have another one coming in, and maybe if you want to read that to me while I'm pulling up other resources.
Yeah, so it says, I have a student who is significantly below in their reading ability. When does having reading aloud materials become applicable?
I think, there's a lot of research out here in the science of reading. Auditory and book reading and Speechify, which are all is an ability where you actually take any text and it reads it to you, all still work on reading skills and comprehension. So if you have somebody that is struggling and you want to make sure they have access to that content, there's no problem by allowing them to have Audible or to have some of these tools. We still have to work on that difficulty in the reading. Like if I think that's answering the question. I'm just making sure. We still have to work on difficulty. So I have a student who's significantly below their readability. So it does. So having read aloud material does help them process the content and the comprehension, but you still want to help that child figure out how to support them with the reading that they're struggling with. And more than likely, it's probably fluency or phonics. But again, you'd have to use that data to see where those gaps are. But by all means, you can access Speech-Defy and Audible and all different types to still help those students. Nobody is getting the links. So Tammy, do you know how I can send a link to everybody?
Yes. Let me see.
I'm gonna put it this way. Maybe I can do this. Did everybody get it that way? I put it through a different way.
If not, we'll make sure we add it in the resources here at the end of the slide deck. So you'll have it tomorrow within the slide deck is what we can do, Kate, if people are not getting it.
I just put it in the chat, not in the Q&A, because I guess people are not seeing the Q&A.
Okay. Hi, can I jump in for a sec? It's Karen Motso from Demonstrated Success. How are you?
Hi, Karen.
Hi. I was just listening, but I just I had typed in a very long response to the question about UDL. So I didn't know whether it showed up or not. And I just wanted to explain that a lot of it winds up to be a philosophical difference. The concept of UDL is based in architectural foundation where you're building inclusion from the ground up. Whereas when we think about differentiation, you think about your learning targets and your goals and your instruction, and you're differentiating once you have that foundation, right? So a little bit is philosophical and theoretical in practice. Oftentimes it winds up to be very, very similar, but not entirely. And I just offered in the response that if you feel free to, contact Tammy and Kate, and I put in my email as well, and I can talk about it with you further. Okay, so.
Thank you, Karen.
Sure.
Thank you, Karen. That helps me because I'm trying to get all the questions. So any way you can help, we appreciate that today,
I'm going to
Karen.
stay on then, and I'll just see if there's anything.
So one of the things is, and I'm hearing this a lot from like the high school students about attitude that it doesn't matter. And I think that we need to get at where are they stuck? Like, where is their difficulty? And then helping them, because at that point, it sounds like they're maybe in deficit thinking themselves as students, or they don't see a purpose in the assignment. So understanding the why are we doing this assignment? Well, we're doing this assignment for X, Y, and Z. But I am hearing that out in the field. So I do appreciate that feedback and that question. And I know how difficult that is. But again, trying to get them as much choice, understanding why we're doing it, and then giving them the supports if they are struggling. All right, so resources with rubrics that include choice within research assessment. Yeah, I think that's really up for the teacher to figure out ways that you can have choice within your assessments or in your writing, allowing them to have maybe that opinion piece, or having a way to say, okay, we're having this big central question, but then still giving them choice. For instance, again, I'm going to go with second grade. I taught that for years. They did biographies and they all got to choose who they were going to study. Or they did reports on animals, and yet we were all doing Arctic animals. They were choosing what animal to learn about, and then they were sharing with one another. So finding a way that has choice. The Buck Institute for PBL does have a lot of great rubrics on that. So that might be a great resource.
Hey, just so you know, they renamed Buck Institute to PBL Works.
Oh, okay. See, I'm dating myself.
So when you guys are Googling, just know that it's PBL Works.
See, I haven't been trained for so long in the Bucks Institute, so thank you so much. So, what advice do you have for teachers with a large volume? Yeah, 75 kids, it is really difficult to try to get through the standards, to try to get through the day, and then to try to meet the needs of those classrooms. I would encourage you to think about how those students are grouped. I know that sometimes teachers do not have the say on that, but really thinking about what can you do inside your classroom to allow for flexible grouping, to maybe break apart your time and meet with kids in groups, and have different abilities that you can control. I understand that that is really hard to try to differentiate in the upper grades, but it is possible. It just requires some innovation and rethinking. All right. Do you want to help out? Anybody else can jump on any of these.
Yeah, so there's another question about what should I do as a special educator to influence others to differentiate rather than sequest, departmentalize efforts?
Well, I think everybody needs to differentiate. So that's like my number one thing. Everybody needs to understand, no matter where these children are coming in, that we need to be able to hit their needs. The students who are higher on that higher end, they need to still be pushed and challenged. And the students with that are struggling in special ed, they really need support. So I guess any things you can provide, tangible tools for teachers as a special educator, things that you can provide to the teachers to help them, is really valuable. Did that answer that question, do we think, ladies?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I didn't see that
Is this
question.
the question
So I'm
around
trying to figure
75 plus students?
I
Is
answered that one. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So that's not, okay. I'm sorry. I'm trying to catch up.
Yeah, it's
Um,
done. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So,
All right.
well, just to be cognizant of everybody's time, I know Kate and Karen are working feverishly to answer questions with this. So we also have some resources. And again, I know that some of you couldn't see in the chat or in the answer box some of the other additional resources Kate was mentioning. We'll make sure we get them in here to other resources for differentiation.
We have a tool. Somebody said that you have to click on the show all button to see the links that I put in. So thank you, Kelly, for telling us that. I just want to get through like the two last ones about, well, maybe I'm getting. There's one for you about the communication difference between MTSS and special ed testing. Can you answer that, Tammy?
Oh, yes.
Oh, no, you're answering that. I'm sorry. I'm seeing you typing.
Great.
Sorry.
That's
No,
okay.
that's
But it's a big answer, right? So Tammy, do you want to have at it or I can?
Oh, no, if you were typing, go for it, Karen. That's fine.
I was just saying that there's all of the differentiation, needing MTSS and SPED testing. Differentiation happens every day, all day in your regular instruction, in theory, of course, right? As I think that Kate and Tammy have conveyed. When that's not working, okay, over a period of time, and you've kept data on a student, any student, a gifted student, a delayed student or a struggling student, you've kept some data to try to judge how they're doing and how they're responding to the instruction. If a student isn't, first of all, your goal is for 80% of your kids to be responding positively to the instruction that you're delivering. If a student isn't responding positively, okay, then an MTSS lens has you thinking about, okay, having nothing to do with special education, what do I need to do for this student? What additional instruction or changes do I need to make for this student to be successful? So that's sort of an MTSS lens, and that works in a tiered manner in the sense of you're going to start with something in your regular classroom and make a change during tier one. And then if you see the student needs more, you might offer some more smaller group and more intensive instruction, or it might be a social emotional support. It could be a lot of different things. That's all for students that that don't have IEPs. They're not in the special education system. Now, if you've moved a student along and you're like, oh, you know what? They're not responding to the tier one instruction. They're not responding even when I differentiate. They're not responding even when I put in some universal supports, whether it's like headphones or additional technology or whatever. And then they're not responding to small group instruction. And then they're not responding to small group instruction or support 3 days a week. And then you start to think, wow, then you start maybe something even more intense and you're collecting data. If the data is still showing that they're not responding to what you're doing, then that's time for a special education path or a special education referral. That was long-winded. Sorry. I hope everyone who needed to hang up, hung up.
And I do just want to emphasize that MTSS and RTI are not the same. So MTSS is it's a whole framework of other components too, that all work towards, with tier one as the foundation that work towards the whole child and student success. RTI is just a piece of that. And so I just want to emphasize that as well.
Thanks.
And then
there's one for you, Tammy, about gifted and talented. And then I will address the reading group one.
Okay, great. So I'm seeing like wearing a parent hat. The gifted reading program is using all the techniques on the no list. So how to speak to the enrichment director in a way that my feedback would be received. That is
a great question.
It is a really great question. Yeah, I think, it's so hard because I don't know the personality. I don't know the district, but I think, asking them what, as a concerned parent, I think you have the right all the time to just go in and sort of talk about how your child is doing, what is being used to support your child to make sure that they have the enrichment opportunities, and then have that be the conversation starter and kind of see like where things go from there. And then having that research to support or that shows it doesn't support things is also really beneficial. Karen, do you want to add to that at all? Or
I guess I was just wondering also what level the student is at. Is it a elementary, middle, or high school student? Because a lot of times in high school, they'll take away all scaffolds. I mean, because they're sort of preparing them for the kind of mediocre instructional approaches of college, of higher education, right? Because higher education is not well known for instructional approaches, and it's more about content. I would definitely leverage research. I would go in and certainly talk face to face. Start by asking questions. Talk to your student. Talk about how engaged your student is or isn't. I think the best way to talk to parents is by leveraging the student's perspective and their level of engagement, and also asking for some data, right? I mean, just because your student is a very strong reader, your student, if they're anywhere from K to 5 could be continuing to grow, and there should be evidence of that. So that's always a great way to open the conversation.
I agree with that. I think that's the perfect way. Look at the data and then see what the data says that every student needs. They all have a goal. They all have something they're working on. So I've got a question about EL students and struggling to talk about the groupings and that it's taking too long. And so a couple of things are coming to mind with this. One is really intentionally thinking about how those groups are created and really understanding the need that's in those groups. Sometimes with this, they're doing dialectal or code switching, which really impacts their phonics. So I see that you're using Heggerty and phonics. And what I'm saying by that is that they're taking their language and then they're shifting it into English, and sometimes that doesn't overlap. The vowel sounds are often impacted. So it's really, again, looking at that group's target and then maybe breaking it down. Maybe you work on a direct skill for, if it's a 20-minute group, for 5 minutes doing phonics, then 10 minutes doing something else, and then ending with a wrap up. So making sure that it's intentional and focusing on those student target needs. And then there's only one last question. And then we'll get, oh, there's more coming in. Statistic. I don't know what evergreen is. Oh, there are two different links from the same organization. I don't know why it comes up as evergreen links, but it should be both. There's two links, so I will deal with that. So the last thing on this slide is there are some great literature and books, and if you're K-3, these are some great resources in this book. It's being raved about in the science of reading community. When you click on it, it'll take you right to Amazon to buy it. Then the author did the 3 to 5. And then there's really one on how to plan reading for the upper grade levels. So those are some great resources for you to incorporate into your group work at school. And I don't know if we had anything else left on slides. Oh, so I know a lot of people were asking about this. So my next webinar is really going to be supporting literacy through evidence-based practices. So again, looking at those assessments and thinking about how we're using our data to meet the needs of the students in front of us. So that's March 14th at 3:15.
And that's our collaboration, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Was your DS and the DOE? That's great.
And then we just want to remind you that a short survey is going to pop up as you close out of this webinar. And so again, we would love for you to provide some feedback, as we're always looking for ways to improve. And then this is my contact information and Kate's, and we can certainly add Karen's in here as well for you all to have. And so with that, we thank you so much for hanging on with us. We hope you have a great first week back from break. And enjoy your day, everyone. Thank you.
Yep. And you can always reach out. Thank you so much.
Kathleen, that's what I was going to say. Please reach out to any one of us, because your questions are really important.